Shoftim Posuk Yutes. Osate Mishpot. You should not sway the judgment, meaning alter justice. Losaki Ponim. Now, this is interesting. Losaka Ponim. What does that mean? You have two defendants, and each one presents his position, and the judge treats one of the defendants differently than the other, more gently, accords him greater honor than the other defendant. It becomes a problem. Why? Because when a person comes before the judge, he has to feel that he's going to receive equitable justice. And if he senses that he's being treated differently, immediately he may not express himself or present his case properly because he feels that there's a bias against him. Therefore, the judge is not permitted. It's understood. You can't favor one over the other. But one can't even treat one differently than the other because the person would attribute it, that favoritism, that there's a bias. And once there's a bias, the defendant will not be able to present his case as he should. And therefore, the judge is actually the cause of this justice that's not going to be rendered properly. Take a look at Rashi. It's forewarning the judge. He's soft, he's more gentle to one of the defendants, and he's more stern to the other defendant. Or the Gemara says, one of the defendants he makes stand, and the other one he sits. Because when the defendant sees that his fellow defendant, his co-defendant, is being treated differently, immediately it shuts him down. And as a result of that, ultimately the verdict is based on the presentation of each of their cases, each of their positions. And since the position will not be presented properly, and the basis for the verdict is based on what they present, therefore the ultimate verdict is not going to be an equitable verdict. And the judge is the cause of this. He's not permitted to take bribery. I mean, does this have to be stated? If the whole concept of justice is to give an honest, righteous, truthful judgment, do you have to tell me don't take shochat? You should not take bribery. If you're not permitted to treat one when they come to present the cases, one more sternly, one more gently, because the defendant is actually not going to present this case properly. So if the judge takes bribery, there's no question. I mean, he's actually giving a corrupted verdict. So what's Lusika Shochad? So Rashi says something interesting, which is the Gemara. Losichad afil lishpot tzedek. Even if you give a correct, your intent is what? To give the person the best accommodation. The other one, the opposing defendant. Lishpot tzedek, we'll see in a moment. Shochad, bribery, blinds the eyes of the wise. And it corrupts appropriate laws. Tzaddik, righteous laws. Rashi, the moment he receives any favor, it's impossible. There's some level of influence. And when he evaluates and they deliberate who's innocent and guilty, he will try harder for one defense over the other because he took the bribery. It says you can't take the bribery, even mishpat tzedek. Now, Does he have to take the bribery? Does that have to be given as bribery? What about if a person goes and he says to the judge, can I carry your bags? Or can I do so? Can I bring you a cup of coffee? Or a bottle of water? The judge is not permitted to have any level of accommodation from any of the defendants. Because you never know, that accommodation may create a bias, and that bias will have influence on the objectivity of the judge in terms of evaluating the information. The Gemara tells of a story. Rav, he had a thread on his frock, on his coat, and one defense took the thread off his coat, that it should be immaculate, or the Gemara says it was a feather of a bird. And he says, Rabbi, can I please just take this off your shoulder? Rav says, you've just disqualified me. I can't adjudicate this case anymore. Because that since you gave me, but it's meaningless. He would do it to any rabbi. He would do this anytime. It's not because he wants that he should favor his position. It's nothing to do with that. It's irrelevant. Whatever reason, even though it's unrelated, but if the judge anyway is a beneficiary within the context of the judgment, within that time period, then he has to disqualify himself. He cannot, because his level of activity has been tainted, and he's not going to give an equitable position on what's going on, and therefore the judgment cannot be correct or may not be correct. Now, the Gemara talks about a situation. You have two documents, and the documents, person sells land. Reuven is the owner of the land. He sells a piece of land, and he identifies the land which he's selling to Shimon, and he gives an identical document to Levi. And the date on both documents are identical dates. And they're signed, they're certified, they're not forgeries. And he truly gifted the property to two people on the same day. And there's no way to know which one he had gifted the property first. There's no way. And there's a question, is that the problem? Because there's no to which one he had given to him first. Or because Tosas explains in Bava Basra that when does the deal close? When does the transfer take place? At the end of the date. At the end of the day, the date is on the dated deed, a dated document. So both transfers take place simultaneously. So when both take place simultaneously, who's the owner of the property? Shimon or Levi? Samara says, how does the court deal with it? It's called Shuda D'Daini. Literally, Shuda D'Daini means it's a toss of a coin. It's up to the court. They could award the property to whichever one they want. There's no rhyme or reason. So Tosa has a question. See, Rashi over there in Bava Basra explains, the court tries to understand the relationship between the gifter and the one who receives the gift. Whichever one he was closer, and there's more reason to say he would have preferred to be Shimon's rather than Levi, that would be the basis for the decision. Tosas disagrees with it. Tosas says, no, it's a flip of the coin. Whichever they decide, it's not based on anything. They have a right to choose whichever one they want. So Tosas has a question. If that's the case, in that case, where it's not based on any rationale and any level of objectivity, so one who wants to get the property should bribe the judge. If the prohibition of giving bribery, as it says, it blinds the eyes of the wise and it corrupts righteous judgment. So here where it's not based on any bias, because over here, what is the basis for the verdict? It has nothing to do to any level of valuation. Whatever the judge wants, he gives it to whoever he wants, like a flip of the coin. So in this situation, the defense should bribe the judge that he should favor him. That's Tosas' question about the Basra. Tosas says something phenomenal. He says, to be a judge, to give a verdict, and the verdict should be within the context of halacha, you have to be qualified to be a judge. For instance, on a Torah level, if a judge is not a somuch, if he's not ordained, with the ordination of Moshe Rabbeinu, he's not qualified to issue a verdict. You have to have that level of qualification. It's called a samuch. The Torah says a judge, to be classified as a judge, he cannot have any bias or favoritism to any one of the defendants. And if he does, he's not qualified to be a judge. Even though the basis for the judgment is not based on evaluation of information, but a judge who has any level, he's not totally impartial, he's not a judge. To be a judge, you have to have total impartiality. If you're not impartial, you're not a judge. So even though the ruling is not based upon any evaluation of information, but the moment you lose your impartiality, you're no longer a judge. If you're not a judge, you're not qualified to issue a verdict. And the verdict of Shuda the Daini is a verdict. As a result of that, the judge is disqualified for that reason. That's Tosa's answer. That's when it says Shochet Yaveh Tzadikim, you have to be always in the state of being impartial. The moment you're no longer impartial, you're disqualified. Although it has no relevance to the final verdict, because here it's not based upon evaluation of information. The judge has to be in a partial state. You're lacking in that, you're not qualified. You know, it's interesting. To be a judge, it's very difficult. Why is it difficult? Let's say you meet two people. You meet one person, he has very pleasant personality, very likable. And another person has another personality, caustic personality. And he could be honest as the day, the one with the caustic personality. It's the way he looks. The look somehow doesn't fit your sense of gentleness, or his voice. His voice somehow grates on you. Before they even present their cases, you're already stereotyped, one as being positive, one being negative. It's a problem. Because the moment both defendants, you don't see them equally as innocent or guilty, the judge has a problem. He's ready, there's a bias. He's lost his level of impartiality. As a result of that, even in Europe, pre-World War II, when the court would, even though it's a different level of adjudication, they would wear talesim when the court would meet, and they would take the talis and they would cover their faces, not to look at the defendants, not to see the way they're dressed, the facial features, because any level of negativity towards any of them or positive feeling, the stereotyping immediately creates a bias. It infringes on their impartiality. Once that impartiality is affected, tainted, you should not rule on that. It's the same idea. But even in a case where it's not based on evaluation of evidence, it's purely the decision to judge do whatever he wants, he's disqualified. Because a shochid yaver, the moment you lose your impartiality, you're no longer classified as a judge, and the verdict of Shuda, which we're speaking about, it has to be given by a judge. And the moment you're disqualified as a judge, you're no longer qualified to issue that verdict. Tzedek tirdov. You should pursue righteousness. We'll see. Rashi cites the Gemara in Sanhedrin. If you have two courts, and one court is more qualified than the other. I'll give you an example. You have Moshe Feinstein, he sits on one court, and you have a lesser rabbi sitting on the other court. They're both qualified to issue a decision in this particular case. But you could go as easily to Moshe Feinstein to adjudicate it. Is it better to go to the more qualified, although the lesser court is as qualified as the greater court? You should go to the greater court. Because by going to the greater court, the person being more proficient, although it seems to be a simple case, it shows that you want to get the ultimate level of truth. And since one is more qualified than the other, although what's needed here, you don't need Moshe Feinstein to rule on it, but still you're demonstrating through your preference, you want this to be beyond any doubt, above reproach, that this is an honest judgment. You want the most honest verdict. That's tzedek tirdov. That you should live and inherit the land that Hashem is giving you. You can look at Rashi. If you have a more qualified bezdin, less qualified bezdin, although they're both qualified to rule, you go to the more qualified. There's a worthiness that if you appoint qualified judges, that will be the basis why they deserve to live and be protected. Lo shiva alad mosa, they should be secure in their land. Now, it's very interesting. I mentioned many times, the Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin that a judge who's done din emes lamito, if you issue a verdict which is absolute truth, meaning I said, even if you meet all the criteria of what a equitable judgment would be, interrogation, if the judge is not comfortable, even after all the protocols have been applied, he has to disqualify himself. That's din emes lamito. It has to be, even for the judge, beyond any doubt that this is going to be, the evidence is presented correctly. That judge is considered God's partner in creation. Hashem says, I consider you my partner. And if not, Hashem says, I will take your soul. That's how serious is the negative side of this. So if you issue equitable judgment, verdict, and the judges are qualified, you will live and you will be secure in your land. If not, so what are you doing? You're creating a setting where these people are God's partners in creation because they are qualified judges. Not only knowledge-wise, but even integrity-wise, they're qualified to issue these rulings. So you're creating a setting, these people are God's partners in creation. The question is why? If not, so I always said, I quote the Medrash, Hashem says, "In yesh din lamata, in din lamalo," that if there's human justice, there's no divine justice. But if there's no human justice, it's corrupted, then there's divine justice. What is divine justice? Divine justice, as Chazal say explicitly, is so exacting, it doesn't differentiate between tzaddik and rasha. You cannot be perfect enough not to be victimized by the midas hadin. As a result of that, by appointing a court which is an appropriate court, qualified, honest, of integrity, that will allow you to live and remain secure in your land, because then there's no divine justice. Nobody's perfect. It doesn't make a difference. But for humans, as long as there's justice and the system is working, Hashem, that's midas harachmim. The moment that becomes corrupted, there's no justice on the terrestrial level, then there's divine justice. Therefore, if you do this, L'mantichia, you will live, the Yerashis Haaretz, you'll inherit the land, and you'll be secure in the land that Hashem is giving you. Okay, let's see.
Two things, Rabbi. Maybe